This is the 32nd meeting of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. We are resuming our meeting. We were in camera. We're now in public. Reminder to members: the meeting will be televised and be available on the House of Commons website for the remainder this portion of the meeting.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Recognizing point of order, Mr. Fergus.
I would like to ask you and the clerk, just because you had just said that we are resuming the meeting. The meeting was in camera. Is this, Mr. Chair, a new meeting? Or Madam Clerk, a new meeting?
This is not a new meeting. This is a resumption of the meeting, that the continuation. This is just simply moving from in camera to a public meeting.
Mr. Chair, sorry, point of order.
Ms. Shanahan.
Yes. Can you please then clarify the speaking order for us? Yes. Because my understanding was when we moved from an in-camera meeting to a public meeting, that it is indeed a new meeting.
It isn't a new meeting. We do have a little bit of a challenge right now because my entire speaking order was lost when we did move from that meeting to this one. But I'll just go through what I have now. Members have indicated those who would like to speak. I have Mr. Barrett, Mr. Fergus, Mr. Baccarat, Ms. Shanahan, Monsieur Fortin, Monsieur Gourd, Mr. Sobera, Mr. Carey, and Ms. Latanzio on the speaking list. So we'll go to Mr. Barrett.
Well, thank you, Chair. The motion put forward by Mr. Fortin is it's very straightforward. It's that the committee report to the House that witnesses did not appear, witnesses ordered by the House of Commons to appear at this committee. Now, those witnesses, Rick Tice, Amit Paul Singh, and Ben Chin, by order of the House, were to appear at this committee, or to have the Prime Minister appear in their place. There's also an order for the production of documents from PCO in the form of a due diligence report ordered to this committee. This, of course, relates to the committee study on pandemic spending and conflicts of interest, which we began the pursuit of this study in October of last year. We're now at a point where we're dealing with a motion to simply report to the House that the witnesses were not released because the committee didn't release the witnesses. That we note that the witnesses were absent, and that we note that individuals, ministers of the government, did write to this committee and then make their letters public, that they had instructed the witnesses not to appear. Those are facts. This motion gives us the opportunity to report this to the House, and then the House deals with it. And then the committee moves on to deal with what it's going to deal with. And I've said before, and I'll say again, that after so many months in dealing with this issue, that the committee ought to conclude this study and report to the House. So if we dispense with this motion that is based in facts, and then let the House deal with that, and then we can address the motion, address the study that we have undertaken over the last several months, final documents in translation, then we can conclude that study. I would note that on the business calendar for the House of Commons, we have, I think, 13 days of time scheduled for this committee before the end of the session. That leaves us with quite a challenge when we look at the number of things that members of this committee have asked to study, and also the obligations that the committee has with respect to the commissioners that would come before the committee on estimates, and studies that the committee has agreed to undertake, including that on facial recognition, as well as we have an open study on the protection of privacy with respect to MindGeek Pornhub. So we have a number of things for this committee to do. This motion is very straightforward. We've talked about it at length, and it's frustrating that we're at a point now where after it took months for us to even get the motion passed to begin this study, that we're now going to, on the tail end, not be able to conclude that study. And not only that, we won't be able to even, the committee won't even report to the House that the witnesses that were ordered to appear didn't appear. And so that's frustrating. It's dysfunction. And now it's time to complete our work. And this motion is very straightforward. So I'll be supporting this motion. It's Friday afternoon. It's 2:30 in Eastern time. The committee's supposed to be done at 3:00. We addressed business that was to be addressed in camera, but now we've got a half an hour. We've got a full speakers list. So I'd be very interested to hear from speakers from other parties if they would be willing to move to a vote on this motion, so that we can then give instructions to our Library of Parliament analysts, so that we can conclude our study into conflict of interest with respect to pandemic spending, and then while we wait, give them provisional instructions, interim instructions, wait to receive the rest of the documents from translation that we're expecting, and then be able to conclude that study without hearing from further witnesses. So we have an opportunity here. We're at a bit of a crossroads, and members of from the government side, the Liberals have the opportunity today to say, you know what, let's vote on this thing. We'll let the House deal with it, and then we can give instructions to the analysts instead of just filibustering, running the clock. And then when people run up against other commitments, we have to adjourn the meeting and then pick up the filibuster on Monday morning instead of doing many of the other important things the committee could be doing. So Chair, I just ask if you could canvass members of the committee, perhaps informally, and see if there's any interest in concluding discussion on this today. And if there is, when those folks speak, they could make their points in a succinct fashion, and we could bring this matter to a vote. And I would note, Chair, that this motion has been debated at multiple meetings since the start of this month, and so we'll be moving into a new month next week. It would be great if we could put this to rest.
Okay, before I move to Mr. Fergus, I will just check and see, is there a willingness by committee members to move to a vote? Okay, I see several heads no saying no, so we'll turn to Mr. Fergus now.
Encore une fois, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Once again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate this opportunity to publicly speak out against this motion. Now, evidently, I have take issue in many ways with this motion, especially the conclusion. Now, I listened attentively to Mr. Barrett's comments, and I fully understand that he would like us to get through this and deal with this motion in short order. But I have to say to you, and I'm being quite frank here, that we have had a number of opportunities to bring this debate to a close. And what has occurred on a number of occasions since January, and in fact it was Mr. Barrett who had moved a new motion instead of taking this one through to its natural course, i.e. this study. But let me set that aside. We're talking about the motion. Mr. Chairman, the part or section of this motion that I have particular difficulty with is the end of it. And it's the final sentence that I'm referring to here. I'm just going to put my finger on the motion. Just give me a second to do that. I'd ask for your indulgence. So here we go. I'm just finding that section now. As I said, it's at the tail end where it states that, well, first of all, there are some sections that aren't factually correct, quite frankly. Now, Mr. Chairman, there is the tail end of the motion, and I'm sorry, I've just lost it again. It's disappeared from my screen, but here we go. That the committee report these events to the House of Commons, and it goes on to say, in order to express its dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction. Mr. Chairman, to express its dissatisfaction. Now that is the section that I don't agree with, quite simply. Now, it's a pity that my colleague, Mr. Fortin, isn't prepared to withdraw that section, and we could leave it up to members of the House of Commons to interpret it as they see fit. Now, oftentimes, at the ethics or public accounts committees, insofar as possible, we try to agree to unanimous reports where there's a broad consensus. And it's a great pity that there's no effort being made in that direction today. Mr. Chairman, there are a number of studies that are under consideration currently by this committee. On Monday, as you know full well, we discussed Pornhub at length. And Mr. Chairman, you know that there are, or the committee is seized with more than one motion at this time. And that with a view to ensuring that we complete our study on that issue, to complete the study properly, adequately. But once again, here we are with this kind of shenanigans. Well, perhaps that's too strong a word, shenanigans. But what we have here is members engaging in petty party politics. And that's not Canadians' top priority, our petty party politics. Canadians watching us right now know that the study on MindGeek and Pornhub that we engaged in earlier this week is of extreme concern. There were points raised by witnesses in their evidence, things that, quite frankly, scare Canadians when it comes to what goes on the internet. And yet here they are digging their heels in on a motion that doesn't enjoy a broad consensus. About half the committee members, in fact, aren't in favour of the motion, and yet the others are digging their heels in and just won't budge. It's such a pity. It's such a pity. Mr. Chairman, we could be continuing our study on an issue that is of extreme importance to all members, I'm sure, of this committee. There is not a single member of this committee that I would venture to say wouldn't see it as a top priority that we do a proper, fulsome, adequate job when it comes to that particular study, i.e. the study on Pornhub and MindGeek. We know that no one sitting around this virtual table, that no one wants to see these individuals and these businesses that are involved in nefarious actions, that they be given free rein and carte blanche to continue doing what they know. I know full well that even on the Conservative side, whether it be the New Democrats, the Bloc Québécois, everyone agrees on this point that I've just made. And instead of turning to an issue on which we could very quickly reach a consensus, i.e. a study which enjoys unanimous support around this virtual table. Instead, members are engaging in petty party politics and pitting members against each other. And sometimes, Mr. Chairman, it is absolutely important to set aside our, shall I call them, quote-unquote, smaller interests and focus our efforts and attention on the quote-unquote bigger efforts that really warrant our attention. Now, I'm not going to rehash everything that I said in our in-camera discussion, but I think that there's a broad consensus here, a broad consensus. I'm sure that no one's going to speak out in support of these nefarious activities that occur, and MindGeek and Pornhub, and my colleagues are all honourable and would support wholeheartedly justice for these victims vis-a-vis this non-consensual sharing of images, photos, etc. And it's to their credit, of course. But, Mr. Chairman, the fact that there are members who are digging their heels in and who just keep on coming back to this motion again and again with, and let's just, set aside your vote, Mr. Chairman. It was 50-50 and yours was the tie-breaking vote. So this is something that does not enjoy a broad consensus, what these members want to do. And quite frankly, as I said, the tail end of that motion is problematic in order to express its dissatisfaction. It was 5 against 5. The chair had to come down and in a tiebreaker sort of scenario. And, that's not the way we should be doing things. We can do better. We must do better. We should do better. We should to be able to reach a broader consensus than by going down that road. And that is the crux of the matter, Mr. Chairman. There's the rub. It does this committee a disservice. It's dishonourable, in fact, that this committee should engage in petty party politics to just cater and kowtow to those kinds of issues, when we're talking, on the other hand, about women who are victimised and who, at the hands of these individuals and businesses, and by way of MindGeek and Pornhub, are victims, real victims. We can do better, Mr. Chairperson. I'm not going to point the finger at any individual here, but we can and we must do better, Mr. Chairman. Now, when I look at the motion that my colleague moved. And the tail end of it, as I said, sets or pits one member against the other and is divisive. Some might say, oh, but this is a consensus. There's a broad consensus behind this. But that's not true. If you define consensus, it's not 50 plus 1 and a tiebreaker vote. That's not what a consensus is. That's not what I call a consensus. Now, I imagine that, well, there was the 1995 referendum, and I'm sure Mr. Fortin, my colleague from the Bloc Québécois, wouldn't call that a consensus. Yes, it was a majority, but you wouldn't categorise that as a consensus. And the same applies here. This is quite clearly and patently not the subject of consensus, of a broad consensus. That would be really stretching that definition, wouldn't it? Now, Mr. Chairman, here we are at a crossroads. I think that we have a choice, don't we? We can set this aside for the time being, or And I must say that the tail end of this motion is divisive. That's what it sets out to do. It sets to pit us against each other. Why can't we act more consensually, i.e., with a view to finding or reaching a consensus, and just tweak that section or just remove those couple of words, and then we would have a far more factual and palatable motion for me. Now, this is what we should do, Mr. Chairman. Now, there is another section of this motion which I confess is kind of went above my head, but I'm referring here particularly to clauses 5 and 6. What's observed or referred to in clauses 5 and 6 are just not factual. It states, after having ordered him not to appear before the committee, in reference to Minister Pablo Rodriguez. That is not factual. It's just not factual. There was a member who asked a question of the witness, of a government minister, who was speaking on behalf of the government as to whether or not there was an order given, and that individual responded, no, there was no order handed down. It was a question of ministerial accountability and nothing else. So why should clauses 5 and 6 why is that snuck into those clauses? Is that just to get people all riled up? Is it just to engage in petty party politics, when really we should be trying to stick to factual remarks and language here, shouldn't we? So, Mr. Chairman, again, this is not the way we should be going about things. And that is why I obviously, as you've gathered, cannot support this motion as it stands. It is not a consensus-building motion, Mr. Chairman. It is not a factual motion, Mr. Chairman. And it is not a motion that truthfully or honestly sets out what has in truth and in actuality occurred. Especially, Mr. Chairman, because the more that we debate this, the more that we miss the boat and miss the opportunity to make headway on other important issues. Issues that will enjoy unanimous support in this committee. Issues that will garner a broad consensus, i.e. seeking justice for victims, women who are victimised, who are made victims because of the willy-nilly distribution and sharing, non-consensually I might add, of this explicit material. So, and quite frankly, they never gave their permission for that to be shared, obviously. That study, those issues will make a difference in Canadians' lives. And it boggles the mind. How is it that we are going to forgo the opportunity that we have today to head in that direction and take action on an issue of that import? And yet we're going to dig our heels in, or they are going to dig their heels in and get bogged down in this motion here that's not factual. I would like to know if each and every one of my colleagues would be prepared to look at these women in their eyes and say, well, look, here, we had an opportunity to work on an issue that would, and to protect you as a result, to do the right thing by you, to ensure that justice is done, to in some way find redress for this, what was done to you. And instead of that, we're going to set that aside and we're just going to climb on board a political juggernaut and, go off into the sunset with these, I guess, hawks, aren't they? They're hawks that are dead set, hell-bent on engaging in petty party politics. It is my contention, Mr. Chairman, that we should be doing the first of those two scenarios. We should be able to look at these women in the eyes, directly in the eyes, and say, yes, I personally and my colleagues have set aside petty party politics, partisanship, and we have stood up and we're going to speak out in defence of you because you can't protect yourselves. And it's absolutely terrible what has happened to you. And nothing can make it right. We can't right that wrong, but the fact remains that we can still protect others who will be victims in the future of these contemptuous and despicable acts, Mr. Chairman. That's disappointing. It's very disappointing to me. And I just can't fathom why my colleagues would go down that road when they have a choice. We should do better. We must do better, Mr. Chairman. Now, let's take a look at another clause in this motion, which again is not based on fact. And that is in clause 6, where it states that Minister Mona Fortier also ordered witnesses, Amitpal Singh and Ben Chin, not to appear before the committee. Mr. Chairman, did someone ask Minister Fortier if there's any evidence in the minutes that would lead one to come to that conclusion, reach that conclusion? You know what, Mr. Chairman? We didn't even give Minister Fortier to utter one single word before the committee. It would have been a simple act of courtesy had we allowed Minister Rodriguez the opportunity to lay those truths out before us. But we didn't even give Minister Fortier, not even, I'm talking about twice in a row. On two occasions, the committee decided well, in fact, flatly refused to hear from her, refused outright. And that, and I'll repeat it once again, it was not the kind of conclusion that you could reach. It was a hasty conclusion to come to. There were no facts that would point us to that conclusion. It just doesn't make sense. So once again, Mr. Chairman, I just cannot wrap my head around this. Why would we support this motion in light of everything that I've said? Why would we spend any more time, our precious and the valuable time, debating this any further? Especially when we have an opportunity now to stand up, to speak out for these women who were victims and whose photos and videos were shared without their consent. And this has been an issue that was raised in the House of Commons too. So how is it that we can continue to stubbornly dig our heels in and not turn our attention to this important issue? Now, I have something else to say. There is a party that likes to think of itself as social democrats. And that party has made the conscious choice to move this motion. And there was a whole lot of motions that they could have chosen from. And had the committee consider. And I think that it was the wrong choice. Let me just put it that way. It's a missed opportunity, quite frankly. That's another way of putting it. And it's disappointing. But having said all of that, I'll leave it up to my honourable colleagues to speak to their constituents, especially given that it's women that are primarily victims of the sharing of, in a non-consensual fashion, of these photos and images and videos on the internet. They're the ones that are the victims. And I'll let my honourable colleagues take the opportunity to stand before them and explain their decision. Now, Mr. Chairman, if you take another look at the motion, and I'd ask you to do that right now, well, there are some facts sprinkled throughout this motion. It's not completely off track, but, you know, there are some sections where the drafter of the motion had a choice and was at a crossroads and could have proceeded in a factual manner, but instead opted to be colourful and to kind of stretch the truth. Well, let me put it more, let me call a spade a spade. They decided to put forward sections in this motion that are just quite clearly not factual. And they had a choice. Once again, they could have gone for something that would have enjoyed a broad consensus, couldn't they? And there are parliamentary colleagues of ours that do not sit on this committee, that are busy with their own committees and the business of their own committees. And they are waiting to get a sense. Well, that is, when we move a motion or when we table a report, they want a true picture of what is going on. And we're not giving them a fair and true picture, are we? We are skewing the picture and we are portraying things in a manner that is, it's a far cry from the truth, isn't it? We're basically misleading them. And yet, we still have time to change course and get back on track here. And I sincerely hope that my honourable colleague, Mr. Fortin, will take the opportunity to amend his own motion so that we can have something that has some wherewithal, something that's factual. Mr. Chairman, on a point of order, if I may, says Mr. Fortin.
Monsieur Fortin.
Alors,
Well, I'll take this opportunity that Mr. Fergus has given me to correct the inexactitudes in my motion. Now, I listened to his very brief remarks about my motion, and my takeaway is that there is two falsehoods, or one falsehood, and that is that witnesses were never ordered to not appear.
Pardon me, this sounds like debate. It doesn't sound like a point of order. I know Mr. Fergus would like to hear from Monsieur Fortin, but Mr. Fergus, you'll have to cede the floor before we can get through the speaking order to get to Monsieur Fortin. So, Mr. Fergus, back to you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Président. Puis
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I will be very much looking forward to hearing Mr. Fortin's response to my offer to once and for all address the issues in his motion. And I'd really love this to occur. And if he wants to consult me in advance, he can reach out to me by email if he wishes. I'd be absolutely delighted to work with him and cobble together a motion that will allow us to reach a broad consensus here. So I'd invite him to do so. Now, if I can just pick up where I left off in critiquing this motion. Mr. Chairman, I don't want to repeat what I said on Monday, or when we talked about how important it is to be in solidarity, that when the minister speaks on behalf of the government, whether it be the Prime Minister, the Minister Fortier, or the Prime Minister himself, or one of his ministers, everyone toes the line. Everyone sings from the same songbook. That is a core principle, and we know that when a deputy minister or an assistant to a minister takes a course of action, the buck stops with the minister, and the minister has to speak to what has occurred on behalf of and for those who are under the purview of the minister in question. And that's a very important message that we need everyone to get a handle on. And that's basically the reason for what has occurred. And I just needed to underscore that. And that's the reason why I cannot support this motion.
But if my colleague would like to respond, as I stated, my mailbox is waiting, and I'm anxious to receive some indication from my honorable colleague in my inbox for us to work in this fashion. This motion, Mr. Chairman. Listen, I believe I'll be coming to a conclusion now, not because it's 3 p.m., but it's because I would like to hear my colleague, Mr. Fortin, as well as other colleagues here, especially from the opposition parties, to see if there is some way for us to not move to a divided vote, 50% plus one, but rather something that will obtain broader support in order for us to do our important work, the important work our committee should be doing. So I will give the floor to the next and thank you to my colleagues for having given me the opportunity to speak.
Turn to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Fergus for his long remarks. Noting the clock and out of respect for the House staff that support the committee, I believe it would be in order to adjourn.
Is that a motion to adjourn?
Yes, that's
Mr.
correct. Sorry,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Then that is not a debatable motion. We'll move to a vote. Madam Clerk, if you'll go
Monsieur
through
le
the roll
Président,
call.
juste une question.
Mr. Chairman, just a clarification, please. I don't want to argue this point, but I'd like a clarification. If I understand correctly, you said that we're going to be adjourning. Will we be starting over or starting back in the next meeting with the order of speaking that you have now, or are we going to be starting from scratch, dealing with whatever people want to talk about, or will we be resuming the debate as it stands now?
It was meant to be a motion to suspend, not adjourn. Sorry if I misspoke.
Okay.
Okay. Motion to suspend the meeting.
Point of order, Chair.
Point of order, Ms. Shanahan.
Don't we need unanimous consent if we're going to be changing the motion? I call the vote. I call the vote on the motion on the floor.
Madam Shanahan, that's not your role, but I appreciate your intervention. Mr. Baccarat, I just want clarification as to what exactly you're moving in terms of your motion. I didn't intend to put words into your mouth. I do apologize if I did that, Mr. Baccarat. Let's be clear about what you intended.
My apologies. I would just point out that since we convened this public meeting, unless I'm mistaken, we've heard from only one member of the committee. And the goal of this meeting is to move forward with the committee's business.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, that's actually not accurate.
Okay, my apologies if I misspoke, Mr. Fergus, but it does seem that we've heard a fair bit from Mr. Fergus, and if we're able to move to a vote on the motion that we were discussing, Mr. Fortin's motion, I think that would be a productive use of our time. However, recognizing that under these unique circumstances, when we're meeting together in a virtual format, and I know that the House resources are extremely stretched at this time, and recognizing that the scheduled time for the meeting ends 5 minutes ago, my intention was simply to suspend the meeting so that it can pick up and discuss Mr. Fortin's motion at the next opportunity when the House resources are available to us.
Mr. Chair.
Okay. This is a motion to suspend. We'll move to a motion on suspension.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
I'm getting some questions. Madame Latanzio, is this a point of order?
This is a point of clarification. I understood very clearly from my colleague that it was a motion to adjourn, and then I understand that that's a non-debatable motion. Can we proceed in that fashion, Mr. Chair? And then depending on what the vote is,
Ms. Latanzio, I will look back in the blues at a later date, but I worry that I put words into my colleague's mouth when I was seeking clarification, and I have allowed him to clarify instead of how I clarified what his position was. And so I will review that, but I felt it was fair that we be abundant clear with what his intention was. So shall
we suspend until you have the opportunity to look into the matter, Mr. Chair, before we start voting on something that perhaps we're not supposed to be voting on? We'll give you that opportunity to do so.
I'm going to allow the member to clarify once and for all what his intention was with this motion, Mr. Baccarat.
So as I just stated very clearly, my intention was to suspend the meeting, and I apologize if the words that I used. I think I was fairly clear in the lead up to my remarks that the intention was to recognize the clock and to respect the resources of the House that are made available to us. Now, it seems like this argument that's occurring is on a fairly pedantic point of procedure, and that the intention of that my intention should be reflected in the motion. That said, if you will give me the floor afterwards, we could vote on the motion, on a motion to adjourn, as Ms. Latanzio has suggested, and then I will, if that motion were defeated, I would make a motion to suspend. So, I would offer that as a compromise.
Okay, so I'm probably more confused than I was to begin with here, but it seems like there is a desire to move forward with the vote to adjourn the meeting, and if not, then we will continue with the speaking order as we have it laid out. So, Madam Clerk, if you will now move to the vote on the motion to adjourn the meeting to adjourn the meeting. Mr. Fergus, I will make this very clear. What we are voting on is
I was going to just suggest Mr. Baccarat has offered an option. We don't want to waste anybody's time. If I'm sorry that he used the wrong word, but he did. But that so be it. Let's just go straight to his desire to move to suspend.
That would be my whole. That was what I was hoping we would get to. Mr. Baccarat was offering another option. I think Mr. Fergus is right that if we're going to get there anyway, let's move to where we, with what he intended and where we'll probably end up. So this is a motion to suspend the meeting until the next scheduled meeting. Madam Clerk, if you'll run through the roll call.
Mr. Dong.
Yes.
Mr. Fergus.
Oui.
Madame Latanzio.
Yes.
Madame Shanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sorbera.
Well, good afternoon, Clerk. Clerk, I will vote yes.
Mr. Barrett.
Yes.
Dr. Carey.
Yes.
Monsieur Gould.
Oui.
Monsieur Fortin.
Oui.
Mr. Baccarat.
Yes.
Yeas pour 10, nays contre 0.
That's a consensus.
That the meeting is suspended.
Taylor, the great consensus.